Sheena has to hop out like halfway through. Oh, and you are Sheena. Hi, Sheena. I just realized that is you. I'm responding to your message. A little bit of a gap there. And I'll give everyone in like a second. I will give everyone the full slides. So you have them. So I'll give you the full slides. So if anyone has to step away, come back, you have these as a resource. One of the things that I learned with going to presentations is if I had to step away for something, going to the bathroom or having something to eat or whatever, if I came back in like 5, 10 minutes, I was hopelessly lost. So this is a way to keep you up to speed, and also just to make it more accessible. You'll be able to use these slides, however you want. And I'm actually just going to do that now. So in the chat, I'm going to give you all of my slides. So you should be able to. This is a shared document. You shouldn't have to log into anything. Let me know if you do, and I'll change that setting. But you should be able to click through everything. Any resource that I mention, you can click on. So you have those links, you can take a look at it. And at the very end of these slides, if you want to use it, is my contact information. So if you want to reach out to me, I have my email there. I have my phone number. You can call me, you can text me, you can email me. One of the things that I try to do is I try to be as honest and open as I can with this. And we're all kind of figuring things out as we go along. And yeah, so if you feel like you're stuck, or if you feel like you just want to have a conversation that would help, please feel free to reach out to me. I think one of the best things we can do in this space is to just collaborate with each other, right? We have so many different bits of wisdom, right? All of us have dealt with generative AI, good, bad, in the middle, in some form, and so having this kind of collective knowledge, I think, is essential. And so yeah, and I'll pop that in a little bit too. So I have that in the chat. You can click through at your own pace if you would like, even as I'm going along. And I'll pop that in probably at the end too, just in case people comment in the middle, stuff like that. So the first thing I'm going to do before kind of talking about some of the things I want to talk about is get a sense of where you're coming at with this. So if you can in the chat, just pop in first of all what you teach. So you can talk about level if you want. You can just talk about topic. It's up to you, topic or subject. I just want to see where people are coming from.
Man, don't be shy.
Yeah, don't be shy. Type in multiple answers if you want. Cool communication studies, cool business communication, social media, awesome. Elementary science. Oh man, they're all coming in at once, so I'm losing them. All right, here we go. Librarian, ethics and AI, awesome. Elementary science education, physical therapy, public relations, intro to AI course, awesome. So a lot of people already know a ton about this technology, which is great. Political science. I teach AI undergraduate and graduate level engineering, awesome. Engineering, physics, social work. Cool. So a really, really wide range. This is great. Chemistry, neuroscience. All right, cool. And I'll give kind of, my own answer to these as they go along. And if you want to talk about this at all, or, um, if you have any questions about it, let me know. What I'm going to try to do is obviously I'll have my slides for this. I'm going to try to keep my slide comments relatively short so we can have a conversation about really what generative AI and AI in kind of a broader sense, how it affects teaching, right? And for me, how it affects assessment. That's one of the big questions I'm going to come back to again and again. So I teach at Berkeley. I teach primarily, so I teach English, I teach the humanities, and I teach AI kind of in that context. So I teach a course on AI powered communication. So trying to figure out how students can write with AI, what they can create with AI, and all of that kind of ball of wax. So that's kind of how I approach this technology. I think a lot about what AI means for pedagogy, for teaching, for assessment, and also just for reading and writing. And so, there are ways I think that AI can help with reading and writing, and ways in which I think can really do some real damage when it comes to students being able to write, being able to think through their writing process and everything like that. And I think that AI is very much a mixed bag. I'm not a hypist. I'm not just gonna, say AI is going to do all these things and completely revolutionize education in a good way. I'm very much kind of in the middle and go back and forth. Um, so the next thing in the chat I'm curious about because you've already had sessions with other people who've come to speak in this series, right?
You are the first one to
Oh,
be.
I'm the
The
first one.
the previous one was from WVU, and that was more scientific. For this time, it's more a discussion of the impact of AI in teaching. Therefore, you are going to be the first of
Oh,
several
cool.
that are coming.
All right, awesome. Because my next question was going to be, what have you covered already? So I'm going to scratch that. All right. Um, and so yeah, so if you could in the chat now, I'm going to change this on the fly because I'm going to do process kind of thinking. So in the chat, just type some thoughts. How do you think AI is going to affect assessment? What do you think it's going to do? And there is no right or wrong answer here. Feel free to just write in some answers, write in as many as you want. But what effect do you think will AI have on assessment? If it will have any effect, feel free to say that it's not going to change anything if that's where you are. Cool. Yeah. More in-person assessment. I'm definitely see that. I think that blue books have had a resurgence over the last year or so. I think that, they were sort of like dwindling in sales. And then ChatGPT came out and suddenly their sales just exploded. So more in-person assessment. Yeah, roll it back to the 1990s style. I think that there is this argument that we're going back in time in terms of pedagogy, and there are good and bad sides to that. It will support students in the full assessment. Yep. So it's definitely as it gets worked in. We have institutions starting to do that. AI driven assessment is very much becoming a thing when you have AI, worked into the assignment itself or is being used to actually assess the student. We are seeing more and more programs that are based primarily on that. All right. So I think AI can reduce the time needed to make assessments. Cool. Do you mean AI facilitates automated scoring? That was from Michael. I think that's definitely one side of it. And I have mixed thoughts on this. I'm more than happy to talk about this. So we have, as I mentioned already, these programs that are about assessing students very, very quickly. We also, that's the kind of faculty facing side of it. There's also a student facing side of it. So if you have been following what Grammarly is doing, one of the things that they just did, so this is interesting for anyone who teaches papers. So a free user of Grammarly can have their paper, pop it in there, and it will guess. So you can upload a rubric, you can tell the system who your professor is, and it will guess the grade of that paper, not based on the quality, but based on the professor. So it will look online. If you have a Rate My Professors page, it could be worked into the profile. It will look at your social media. And I talked to people who work at Grammarly about this, and they were very honest. And they said it's not just guessing based off of the quality of the argument. It will give you a higher score if it thinks your paper matches up with that professor's opinion. So, if, for example, I had a student write about assessment, which I'll talk about today, a student might be able to use this program. The program will see, oh, Jason Gulya thinks maybe we should not focus on grades. All right. So I'm going to encourage the student to take that argument because it's going to give them a higher score, right? And so this balloons and becomes problematic very, very quickly. It's one of the things that really worries me. Oh yeah, and Don mentioned the article about bringing back the blue books. Yes, they're very much back. I think there are pros and cons to this. I think that there's a very good reason for the refocusing on in-person assessment and things like that, especially if it's something you really need to be sure that students can do a skill. But it does become problematic for a couple of reasons. One, wearables. and I'm not going to go into the weeds with this, but you might already know that students are starting to show up in college classes and high school classes with Meta glasses. So you can buy them. They're actually bestsellers now through Meta and through Ray-Ban through their site. But they're glasses with AI embedded within them. So I had a student who was teaching a social studies course last year, and he noticed that a student was mumbling to himself in the back of the room. And he thought it was sort of strange. The student hadn't done it before. So he let it go. But then it continued for the next few minutes. And he ended up talking to the student. And what happened was the student was scanning the worksheet and it was feeding him answers. It's actually just doing the work. And these are becoming more prevalent. They're becoming more hidden, right? If you look at those glasses, you can't see anything. They're invisible to you, right? You can't see any sort of the scanning, any of those things it's doing. So I think that's going to make things problematic. And then I also think that in moving to in-person assessment and things like that, we have to make sure we're continuing to be accessible, right? We're being able to really accommodate students who might have trouble with that, right? And there are very real practical issues that come up, right? So for me, I was able to always do blue book exams because I was used to it. I grew up just writing by hand. Sometimes students now are not. And there have been cases where a student just can't write for that long. They can't write for an hour, right? And so it's making sure we're accommodating things. So anyway, and then, oh yeah, Michael mentioned, what if students use AI to customize the homework towards the rubric, and then the homework was scored by AI aligning to the rubric? What are the ethical implications? So, and this is something that I worry about a lot. I think that it's certainly possible that we're going to see this kind of dystopic situation where we have students creating things with AI and then it gets assessed by AI, right? So they get feedback through AI. Then the student processes those revisions with AI and it gets scored in the system with AI, right? And so trying to figure out how we can get the human in here, right? And what happens if we don't? And these are questions that, I ask openly, using the checks. I think that no one's really worked them out yet. Um, yeah, Martin mentioned bring back manual typewriters. Yeah, no, I'm sure there's probably a typewriter out there that also has AI embedded within it. I 100% think that's probably a thing that I don't know about. All right, cool. So thank you for these answers. I think that they're going to very much kind of be in conversation with what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to try to, in this presentation, I'm going to try to keep it short, and I'm going to just try to ask a provocative question. And you don't have to agree with me, right? I actually welcome, if you think you're coming from a different angle or you see something different happening here, let me know, right? What I tried to do is to create a PowerPoint that, yeah, asks that provocative question and does it using entirely new information. I've never showed these slides to anyone before. You're the first group seeing them, and I wanted to use them to just think through an idea. All right, so, and I did this before, so it should work. All right, cool. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, so can you see my screen and everything?
Yep.
Cool. I always ask now because early on when I was doing more presentations, I didn't ask and then realized it was showing the wrong screen time. So I always ask now because I have that nightmare that people aren't seeing what I'm going to be seeing. All right, so what I really want to do is ask a question. And I mean this as an open question. I'll kind of give my argument and everything. So, and this might be different than some of the other presentations that you have seen or that are part of this series. So I'm not going to focus on the how-to stuff, right? I'm not going to focus on, this is how you incorporate AI into your assessment. This is what you can build with AI. I'm not going to focus on that. I want to do something a little bit different. And I want to think a little bit about the implications of some of this technology, right? What it means not just for assignments, which is an important topic, but also for assessment itself. Right? What does this mean for schooling? What does this mean for grading? And my question is going to be, with AI here, should we be thinking about alternative assessment? And that's going to be kind of the big question I'm going to structure these quick remarks around. And I'm going to try to keep this probably around 15 minutes or so to just give you kind of the basic idea. So, all right, so the big idea is this. And again, I welcome pushback of all kinds. It's that if we're going to, and I'm going to, sorry, one second. Apparently, I did not get out of my email and it's going to go crazy right now. All right, there we go. Now it's gone. All right, so I'm going to reshare my screen. That pesky email. All right, here we go. So here's the big idea. All right, if we're going to adapt to the current moment, and I purposely don't mention AI in that because I think AI is just part of the conversation. We need to chip away at the transactional model of education. And as I go forward, I'm going to try to walk through that in a little bit more detail, what that looks like, right? And we might have seen versions of this popping up in our classrooms. It's by no means new. And one of the ideas that I'm going to keep coming back to is that I think the conversation about what AI is introducing into our classrooms is important, but I think we also need to think about how AI is simply kind of stepping into trends that have been happening for a long time, right? They're by no means new. One of the things that really interests me is how AI is fitting into a couple of big trends that have been happening literally for decades, right? Probably 50 to 60 years. This has been building, and now AI is being worked into that ecosystem. So, I want to walk through some of the research, and this will get us to that transactional model of education. So, and I, on the PowerPoint slides, which I gave access to, and I'll pop in at towards the end of this presentation in a little bit. Um, so I'm giving you two books, and you have the links directly on that PowerPoint slide. So I highly recommend taking a look at them. They give a pretty good sense of some of the things that have been happening with education in the K to 12 space, but also very much in the higher ed space, right? And they're not really separate in some ways. There are some things that are a little bit different, but these books kind of focus on the overall system. So the first book is called Doing School. How are we creating a generation of stressed out, materialistic, and misinformed students? And this was Yale University Press in 2001. All right, so not super current. But then there was another book, which is called Schoolishness, by Susan Bloom, who we might know, we may have heard of. She's an anthropologist at University of Notre Dame. And she writes about alienated education and the quest for authentic, joyful learning. So I'm not going to go into the weeds with any of these, but I am going to give you the gist. All right. So in doing school, Pope profiles five high achieving high school students, right? These are students who are doing incredibly well, who are going and getting A's, getting hundreds on everything, right? Top of their class, right? In high school and going into really, really prestigious colleges. And so she went through and she did these kind of deep dives, these deep interviews of these students and tried to figure out how they approached education, right? And there are a lot of commonalities here, right? And again, these are students who have done incredibly, incredibly well. And so here's a quote from the book from Kevin, which kind of captures his worldview. And he was very honest and open with this, right? He told her, people don't go to school to learn. They go to get good grades, which brings them to college, which brings them to high paying jobs, which brings them to happiness. So they think. But basically, grades is where it's at, right? That it's all about maximizing their grades, getting the most points possible. Right? That is Kevin's focus. And that is a focus that cuts across in many ways these students. And I think that the research tells us that it's a big trend, right? It's a big group of students that this encompasses. And so that is a book from 2001. So I'm going to give you one from 2025. So this is the book Schoolishness. So this is Susan Bloom. And she looks at schoolishness as really being embedded within higher ed right now. right? Really embedded with how colleges work, right? And this is not, again, this is not distinct totally from the K to 12 conversation, but is in very much, it extends that. So for her, schoolishness means packaged learning. I know this, so learning that was created maybe even 5, 10, 15 years ago that is still being used, right? Far exists the student, maybe even the instructor. All right, unimaginative teaching, predetermined time, and artificial boundaries, right? So these are what makes schoolishness. So the basic idea is that the education system, in her argument, rewards, so it doesn't reward learning. It rewards the trappings of learning, what we think learning looks like, right? That it's not about, retaining knowledge or applying knowledge. It's about, did you get an A? What is your GPA? Where's your degree from? Right. And so this whole system has been created around that idea that we look at the trappings of learning as opposed to getting to the learning process itself. And for her, this leads to alienation, dependence, and dread. Right? There's very much this emotional response to schoolishness. And so we have this system that is built on, yeah, rewarding the trappings of learning and alienating the student from what they learned, right? And we might have seen versions of this, right? I see this pop up all the time, right? When, I cover a course, introduce a course, and a student asks me, what do I have to do to get an A? Right? What do I have to do to get blank? Right? Or at the end of the semester, a student might say, can you give me extra credit points to get me a B? Right? Now, I do want to take kind of a quick time out here and I want to clarify something. I don't blame students for that, like at all. And Susan Bloom doesn't either. Part of it is that the system has been created that rewards that mentality, right? Those are justifiable responses. And honestly, I do it myself. I started to notice, and I did this over last year. I tried to look at my comments on student papers over the last few years, right? They're already in Canvas, so I can still click through them, still get access to them. And I would always make comments like, good job. I would go over what they did well, how they can improve, and then I would end with something like, you lost X number of points for blank. Right. And so, like, and I do, and that is in the interest, that was in the interest of transparency. I thought, cool, I gave you a 93. I need to show you where you lost those 7 points. Right. And that came from, and I think for a lot of us, that comes from a good place. But the flip side of that is it does this. It rewards those points. It brings attention to those points. And so I have this kind of, I'm constantly going back and forth that I want to be transparent. I want to let students know, you lost 7 points and here's why. But I feel like as soon as I do that, I lose the focus. I lose the focus on learning because now we very quickly, and again, I'm a part of this system. We have that deficit mindset and it comes in very, very quickly, right? What points did you lose? Why did you lose them? All right. So, and this is what I'm going to try to flesh out a little bit here. And I am going to try to kind of wrap this up now because I welcome conversation about this. And for me, what's interesting is how AI fits into this conversation. And I think it very much does. So for me, doing school and schoolishness tie into this transactional model of education. And this is me boiling it down to 4 steps. It doesn't get everything. As with any sequence like this, it is sort of reductive, but what I'm trying to get is that kind of the big moves that tend to happen with this transactional mindset. So the basic idea is that students come into a classroom and they create an educational product, an essay, a presentation, a poster, whatever it is, right? That thing. We might have little ways that we get a sense of the process, right? Sending in drafts, things like that. But overall, and I did this too. Had this experience in my own college, in my own undergraduate, that I might send in a draft and get feedback, But in the end, the professor just looked at the final paper. That was it. That's all they looked at, right? They said, all right, here's your final paper. I actually had a professor who, before he read any final paper, he would take a sheet of paper and cover everyone's name. And the idea was to make it objective, but the flip side of that is that it just focused on the product itself. So students create a product, then they trade in those products for grades, right? Here's my paper. If it's good, get a 91, 93, whatever it is. But the goal is to maximize the return on investment, right? I did this thing. I want the points. That's what matters. That's what the mindset taps into. And then step number three, students trade in those grades for degrees and certifications. And then step number four, they trade in those degrees and certifications for jobs. So it's kind of like capturing the overall thing. So how does AI fit into this, and particularly generative AI? So programs like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, everything else. So I think there are a couple of ways, and I'll list three of them that generative AI fits into this conversation. I think the first one is that it makes educational products more problematic as indicators of significant learning. There is a decent amount of, are kind of big, I'll say it this way, big assumptions about if a student can hand in, say, a paper or complete an exam, right? That we'd be able to, in the past, make a set of assumptions about what happened behind them. If a student handed in a paper that was good, had a good argument, had good evidence, was able to synthesize ideas, we were able to say, all right, that student can argue, that student can use evidence, that student can synthesize. And one of the things that generative AI is doing, and this is not new by any means, but I think that it's become more extreme, is put a giant question around that, right? Do they know how to do this? I saw the evidence of it, right? There's a product that shows that supposedly they can do that. But now with all these assistive technologies, is that the case? Right? They just took it off like last week, but up until recently, if you went into Google Chrome, right, you open a browser and you went into Canvas and were taking a quiz, in the upper right part of the screen, you would see, do you want me to help you do this? Right? And you can simply generate answers. Now, that button, I believe, has been removed because of the pushback. But that, in many ways, right, shows how we're getting to this point where there's giant questions around what a student can do, right? We see that they complete that quiz, they complete that assignment, they complete that paper. Well, does that mean they've learned that, right? And that's just become more and more problematic. And then the second way it fits into generative AI fits into this conversation is that it promises students a faster, more efficient way to get a high grade, right? And if the grade is the focus, that makes sense, right? Because for us, as we're all very interested in the learning process, right? We might say, well, but why would you offload that? You didn't learn anything. It doesn't stick. But that is thinking outside of that transactional model. In the transactional model, if the focus is on getting, say, a 93, and then this program comes along and says, I can get you a 93 in 30 minutes. On your own, it might take you 3 hours, right? So that's how this technology gets worked in. And one of the things that I think is so essential here is to recognize that these AI companies are seeing college students as a huge portion of their market, right? They're marketing our students hard, right? So when Google decided to offer Gemini for free, they said college students have it for a year for free, right? And they're extending that, right? I think they're going to make it like 2 years and they're going to keep giving it for free for college students. And over the last 3 years, the same thing has happened in the summer. So if you look at sources that track AI usage, you'll notice something, right? Throughout the school year, it kind of plateaus. There's a huge increase in May, and it gets to June and it plummets. It's just like a downward arrow, right? Because students are going on break and they're not using it. And so these companies are coming at students and saying, this is a shortcut, right? And one of the things I think we need to do is think about what that means for our students. And I think that that's where the transactional model of education becomes really problematic because if the focus is on grades, well, there's a logic to doing that. And the third thing is that it feeds into the model of alienated education that has become entrenched in our educational system, right? So there's a scholar, I'm going to go blank on his name right now. Oh, Floridi at Yale. And he has this idea that one of the things that's happening is we are starting to see students do less and less of what we call close writing, which means actually putting down the words. And they're doing more what he calls distant writing, which is writing with a large language model, right? Prompting it, giving revisions. And so even there, like that's a form of alienation, right? We're starting to create more of a gap between students and what they're doing. All right, so alternative assessment, I'm going to try to boil this down. So the idea is that alternative assessment does a couple things, and there are a lot of different forms of it. So alternative assessment is kind of an umbrella term. There are a lot of different ways to do it, but the basic gist is that it looks to de-emphasize grades, so kind of recenter learning. They tend to focus on process and product. So instead of just looking at, students create an educational product that you then look at and grade, they create kind of a documentation of the student's learning process. They don't all do that, but a lot of them move in that direction. And the goal here is to disincentivize overusing and misusing AI. So there are a couple of main forms that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to try to wrap this up in like 4 or 5 minutes. I can't get everything. I can't cover all the forms, but here are some of the main ones. So contract grading, which I'm going to show you a version of now that I'm doing in my in-person classes. Competency-based assessment, which is a big one, right? Being able to say, once the student shows you they can do that, you move on to something else. So it kind of ticks something off. You go forward from there. There are universities and colleges that are built around this model. And then also a lot of them use self-assessment. And you can combine these, right? It doesn't mean you have to fit one or another. And I'm actually going to show you a model that I use that kind of pulls from each. And all right, so this is the journey I've gone through. I've eased into what I'm going to show you now. So I started with just having some ungraded assignments in my courses, right? Student assignments that I just said, well, this is for you. This is your space to figure something out. And I don't grade it, right? Now, the con of that is sometimes students will just not do it, right? It does kind of disincentivize it, but that's how I got started with it. And then I started with revised to mastery assignments. So these are assignments where a student goes in, I give them a complete or incomplete based off of just if they hit the learning objective, right? Did they do what I wanted them to practice? If they did, got it complete. If they didn't, they got it incomplete. And they could revise it. They could resubmit. They can go and try again and again and again. And all that matters is that they get to that complete and they get full credit. All right, and now what I'm doing is bigger. It's a bigger experiment trying to figure out contract grading. So I'm going to show you mine. And this is one from my current course, and you can click here. So if you have the slides, you can click there and see the whole thing. So this is something that I am using now, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And I go over my students with us and I let them weigh in. We can change, I tell them we can change things either at the beginning or as we go along. So I walk through what is a grading contract? Why are we doing it? All right. And what I want to show you is at the very top. So here's what I do. I don't give grades on individual assignments. I don't give percentages. I don't give letters. All right. So instead, what I do is I tell students, this is the thing, this is the assignment. I want you to hit an objective. So if it is, say, a class discussion online, I might tell them your objective, connect with other students, right? Or connect with other students by talking about this topic. If a student does it, complete, right? Cool. I can say you're practicing doing that thing. If a student, for example, goes in and writes a post but doesn't respond to anyone, they're not connecting. So I give them an incomplete. So getting a complete isn't just doing the assignment, it's actually showing that you are practicing a skill. So, and what I'm looking at is, and it occurs to me it's still okay. So now hopefully that's a little bit easier. So I go through and I have a complete explanation here about what the complete incomplete system is. Right, I try to be very, very clear with it. This is what it means to get a complete. If you get an incomplete, it means I want you to give it another shot, right? Try something different, take a different angle. And if you do that, you get that complete, you get full credit, right? No points are lost. I wanted to create a system that was focused on learning and was focused a little bit more on trying again, because I felt like in traditional grading, students were also always so punished for trying something new or needing to give it another shot. So I wanted to create something that's outside of that, right? And you can see that I tried to do everything holistically. So I don't have any individual papers here. I don't do that. So another change I made is I got rid of single assignments, right? I wouldn't say write a paper about blank. Instead, I do what I call here scaffolded major challenges. And I also call these process clusters. So instead of just looking at, say, a paper, right, and that being the grade, I might have students, step one, design your project, right? Whatever it is, it needs to be related to course content. Step two, design the process, right? What process is going to help you get to that product? All right. And then I might say, all right, go through that process. So if you want to start with free writing or outlining or whatever it is, go through that process. So that's the third step in the process cluster. Then I might say, and this we can pivot depending what you teach, self-assess. How are you doing so far? Right? Are you sticking to your plan? Are you pivoting? What grade would you give yourself right now today? Right? And so then what I end up with is a process cluster that shows how they worked through this. And so this is about, especially with the complete incomplete system, pushing against the common incentives for students to overly rely on generative AI, right? It gives me a sense of how things are linking up, which is very, very helpful. And they're not as focused on percentage points, which kind of pushes against that tendency to just use ChatGPT or anything else to complete the work. Um, so that's what I've done, right? And so there are a couple of, and just kind of capture this in a Cliff Notes version or Spark Notes version. I moved everything to an incomplete complete scale, right? You hit the objective, you get a complete, you don't, you get an incomplete, and you try again. And then I did everything as kind of groupings, right? And that's a way to not just look at a single product. And so that's another way to kind of push against that transactional model. So I want to focus on process as opposed to product. And I can talk about that more and do a deeper dive, but I want to try to give us, 15 minutes to chat if we want to. And again, I'm just going to throw this question. I kind of started with a version of this, but now that generative AI is here, and many of our students are even power users of this technology, a lot of them are. Is it time to lean into alternative assessment, right? To shift our focus from grades to learning? And again, alternative assessment is a big version. And even in my version, I showed you, it's contract grading, but it also is a competency-based model, right? I want students to get that complete by showing they can do something. And self-assessment is also part of it. So we can pick and choose. We can create our own model if we want to. All right, and I am done. So thank you for coming and talking to me. It gives us about 17 minutes to chat if you want to. And again, this is meant to be a way to give a set of provocative questions, which I go back and forth. And I'm thinking a lot about alternative assessment and process oriented teaching, especially now in this age of AI or whatever you want to call it. But right now, I'm left with more questions than answers about how to move forward. And I'll be totally honest with that. So if you want to reach out to me, you can scan that QR code. The slides also have a link. And I will also, again, now that I'm going to do be quiet, I will pop the presentation slides back in there. So on the very last slide, you can get my contact information. And again, it has my email. It has my phone number if you want to use it. You're more than welcome to. So thank you for listening to me. And now I will stop sharing my screen. I'll be quiet and we can have a back and forth if you have questions or comments or disagreements. So go for it. I'm done talking now.
Thank you, Jason. Really appreciate it. Now the floor is open for comments and questions. Gary, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you so much for the talk. Very interesting. And I really like especially the way you put it in context at the beginning. And it triggered a whole bunch of thoughts. And I like your contract assignment kind of perspective. But earlier in the talk, I was thinking that one thing that can be done to partly not fix the problem, but help with this over reliance on AI while not discouraging it. Because what I feel is that we also have to teach the students how to use it. Because in the job, they won't care if you use AI and you're able to do your job and it's actually faster, then do it. That's an advantage, right? And so I think defining the learning goals better and not just better, but also the context in which that skill has to be performed. So is it something in person? Well, you might not have time to use AI. Is it at home and you have, it's free time? And it's faster to use AI. Use it as much as you want, as long as the product is good. So is it a product where you have infinite time and AI helps you, or is it something you have to do on the fly and you can't use AI? Or can you use AI on the fly and it helps you? I mean, the context I think is important, and having learning goals where you define that very clearly, and then designing your assignments really to match those learning goals. So backward design, where you define your goals very well, including context, and then have the assignments really thought of clearly to match those learning goals. Then do the teaching to really get the students there. I feel that would partly also sort of address this question.
Yeah, I think that that's essential. And there are different ways I think to do that depending on context, depending on what we were teaching. I think the key, Gary, as you mentioned, is keeping the focus on learning, keeping the focus on what that learning objective is, and then you design from there. So I didn't go into it in like a great deal of detail just for the sake of time, but one of the things I have my students doing right now are designing their own what I call so they're I call them soups. So it's SEWPSs. So these are self-empowering writing processes. So what I do, and I mentioned a version of this in my talk that, they design the project, right? They say, well, I'm interested in this. This is what I want to do. They design that process. And I tell them what you want to do. You can work AI into that process. But I am going to ask you to defend both your AI use or your non-AI use. So that if you say, well, I'm going to create an outline, right? And I'm going to use AI to help myself out. Well, what went into that decision, right? I think self-reflection is a key part here that we have to, encourage our students to think about when to use AI, when they don't want to use AI. And this is an individual decision, right? I might say, well, outline, I really suck at formatting it. So I'm going to use AI to kind of help me out, right? And so one of the tools that has been really, really helpful for me is the AI assessment scale, which people might have come across in some context. This was developed by Leon Furtz and Mike Perkins at, I believe, University of Melbourne. And it's super, super simple. So number 1 to 5. So 1, no AI, and 5 full on AI, right? It's fully AI generated. And so originally it was designed as a faculty facing tool to let students know this is a permissible use, this is a non permissible use. But I give it to my students as a student facing skill or a student facing tool. So a student might say, all right, for my outline, a 2. A 2 is a good number, right? I want my own thoughts, but I want to use AI to help me out with the formatting, some of the bullet points. And so I asked them to do that, right? Go through their process, give a number, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and say, this is why I did that, right? And so typically I'll get like one, two, threes, and fours. Every once in a while, I get like a 5, right? It's in saying, well, I felt like I could totally offload this. And that becomes a part of the conversation too. So yeah, I think you're right, Gary. It's about, teaching students how to use this technology self-reflectively, responsibly, and also creating a culture of transparency around that. So, for me, that tool, that's not about like catching students. That's just giving students a descriptive tool. They can say, well, this is where my use of AI fits on that scale, which I think is really, really valuable for them to think about. And if anyone wants that assignment or needs like the link to that scale, let me know. I can always pop it in the chat, or I can send it to you after if you want to reach out to me.
Jason, if you want, you can send me anything that you want to share with the group, and I can send it to everyone.
Cool. All right, yeah, and I have a yes, please. So yeah, yeah. Although I can send that to you, and you can forward it to everyone. So I'll take note to send that in.
Any more comments? Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there. So this is Martin Dunlap, I'm a librarian here at WVU. So sort of my area is information literacy, right? Is teaching people to
Yeah.
know the difference between reliable and not reliable information. And that's a problem with AI, right? Is it's not reliable. Uh, I mean, if you get 80% right, that's great in a lot of fields, right? That'll get you in any Hall of Fame. But if you're an engineer, 80% will, your bridge will fall down or, or whatever. So I, I have an issue with AI because people rely on it as being correct, and we know it's not, right? And we have the things called hallucinations, right? Where it makes up, if it says, hey, write me a paper on something, include the references will be completely made up, right? And I've run across this. I'm also on the IM chat, and people will say, well, is this legitimate or not? And I'll say, absolutely not. This does not exist. How do you come back from that? So I really do spend a lot of time saying AI can be used to polish something, maybe like you talked up Grammarly, but writing something, there's going to be a lot of bad information in there, and you might spend more time fixing the bad information than it would have taken you to just write the stupid paper. So.
Right. Yeah, and I think step number one is just like talking to our students about that and like showing that, right? Like showing like, I created something. This is what it looks like to get that answer from ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, and to fact check it. One of the things that I learned very quickly with this technology is that many of my students, even today, approach AI in a way that's very similar to a search engine, right? They go and there's this feels transactional too, that they go, they put in a question, they get an answer, and they move on, right? They just take that answer as is. And yeah, I think for anyone who uses the technology consistently, we see how problematic that is. And so showing them like what it means to fact check, what it means to really be accountable for whatever we hand in. One of the things, I'm gonna mess up the phrase, but like you can offload tasks to AI, but you can't offload responsibility, right? You will still have that, right? If you hand that in, like you are still responsible for that thing. And in some businesses, and in some fields, like that's it. Like you can't have an 80, right? That bridge is gonna fall down and people are gonna die. You can't have that level of error. And so like teaching that and walking students through, what that looks like, showing them what it looks like and being transparent. And if we use AI in our own stuff, one of the things I think is really valuable, and I do this in all of my classes now, if I create something using an AI, so I just created something using one of Canva's AI features, right? Something that I just cannot have on my own. I said, I created it with this. Here's the chat I did. And for any student who looked at that, and I actually showed students, what this looks like, it's a conversation, right? It wasn't a one and done deal. I went and I got something, I didn't like it, I reoriented it, right? And it's a constant back and forth. And that was kind of a light bulb for some of my students that, it wasn't really a transaction. I went back and forth with this program until I got what I wanted that I felt like was accurate. And I try to show students I try to show my students that as much as possible. Another version I did with this recently was I had students, I used a custom chatbot I built for them, right, for a particular exercise in class. And they did it and they thought, all right, this is really useful. And then I showed them the prompts, right? Showed them what's going on behind it. And like I showed them like this part of the prompt I put in there because the bot screwed up, right? It screwed up here, it screwed up here, it screwed up here, it screwed up here, right? So I had to keep changing the prompt until it like got rid of some of those errors. And even then it's like they're not totally gone, but like showing that like it is an ongoing process, and these the hallucinations here are can be extremely problematic for anyone who over relies on them. And I think that being honest and open with that, um, I think is step number one. And then from there, I think it's getting to that information literacy, leaning into those skills that we've been teaching for a while. I think it's also very helpful.
Thank you, Jason. Any other
You're
comments?
welcome.
I have a question about, the learning of model that you were described there. Is that going to work in a large lecture format where you have 200 students, one professor, and a couple of TAs?
Yeah, so the big question is, yeah, how much you can scale it. And so I've created that for my small classes. Now there are ways to scale it up. Um, and so one of the big ways that people tend to scale it is really leaning into self-assessment, self-assessment and peer assessment. And there are pros and cons to this too. So, and a lot of it depends on how much confidence you have in your students to be able to accurately assess how they're doing, right, in terms of a rubric. So I have friends who do a model like this in, a 200 person class. And so with the completes and completes, you do save yourself some time. So I will say for the vast majority of my assignments, it counterbalances. So if I have a set of students, in some ways it's more work because I have to give more formative feedback and stuff like that. But I also save time because I'm not giving individual percentage grades. So I think it's a matter of figuring out, yeah, if you have a two-person, are you talking like, I'm sorry, Harry, in person or online?
In person.
In person.
But of course, every now and then it has to be online.
Yeah, and so having those things online. So I think it's a matter of kind of streamlining things. So one friend that I have who does this, I don't go this far, but it is one way to adapt it. So I talked about the complete incomplete system. So I need students to hit a learning objective. And I can do that because, my classes are capped at, 30 students or so, most of them. But I have a friend who teaches large lectures, and the idea here is that they're just looking for the complete. And that's when you see the streamlining, right? If you're just saying, like, did the student do it and like reasonably do it, right? Then you just give them that complete. You might give them some feedback depending on the assignment, but that's the way that they streamline that. Now, the plus side of that is it does push against traditional grading. The negative side is you can feel like it could be gamed, right? And it could be, right? A student is going through and feels like they can slip through the cracks. So I think that's a decision that you can just make. But that is one way that I have a friend who does it. But the question of scale, I think, is key. Um, and so what you might do is that might be a push to maybe not do contract grading and look for another form of alternative assessment. Because again, it's a big term. There are a lot of different ways to do it. So that's
Thank
my
you.
sort of me thinking through it, but I feel like it's not quite an answer. It's just a matter of how you can scale it for your individual course.
Thank you, Jason.
You're
Anything
welcome.
else? I think we have 3 more minutes before we have to leave. Nothing else? Well, if not, let me thank Jason again. That was a great talk. Thank you for putting all these thoughts in our minds, and I think it will give us an opportunity to discuss these issues that are important for any university. Therefore, I really appreciate it. I really hope that you will send me the info that I can share with the group. And thank you everyone for coming, and I'll see you in a month. Bye,
Yes.
guys.
Thank you, everyone. And feel
Thank
free to
you.
reach out to me if you want to.
Thank you, Jason.